Thank you, Erika, and thank you, Kristy, for laying a great foundation for the second part of this presentation. As Erika mentioned, my name is Sarah Charlop-Powers, and I'm the co-founder and currently executive director of the Natural Areas Conservancy. And I wanted to start my portion of today's talk by giving a little bit of background on our organization and the model in which we partner with the City of New York. Folks who are familiar with New York City may be familiar with organizations like the Central Park Conservancy or the Prospect Park Alliance. There's more than 50 formal nonprofit organizations that have signed management agreements with the City of New York to bring services above and beyond what the public sector traditionally invests into, mostly to specific parks. So a group like the Central Park Conservancy raises money and provides programming in that park. Our organization is structured in a similar model. We raise all of our funds privately, and we're governed by a board of directors. But as was mentioned, we work very closely with the Natural Resources Group in the Parks Department. We've conducted work in more than 50 public parks, and our focus is primarily on conducting scientific research and creating tools and best management practices to advance the management of natural areas and to increase their visibility and resources that are used to elevate them as a resource for the public. So as Kristy mentioned, we've worked very hard and closely with the Parks Department, the Forest Service, and many other partners here in the city for really many years. You could count this as a 5-year project if you count all of the research that went into the creation of the data sets that allowed us to create this plan. And we were thrilled to release the Forest Management Framework for New York City in April of this year. And the framework, just to summarize this in a sort of non-technical way, is really about creating a wall-to-wall plan for the entire forest resource, which is something that has never been done here in New York City. There's been incredible effort and a lot of innovation made over the past 35 years in restoration and management, but we've never had on the books a vision and a plan for the management of the entire system that included metrics for success and a real roadmap for how to achieve a set of stated goals. And the framework, which is available at the website shown here on the slide, lays out targets for the biological health, but we also have a real focus on expanding recreation, volunteerism, and job opportunities as we think about bringing this resource into its full potential. And as Kristy mentioned, we have identified a cost estimate of $385 million over a 25-year period to achieve these goals. We've been working very closely with partners in the government and nonprofit sector to get the word out about this plan, and we've been talking about the plan in these ways, which I think have a lot of resonance for all of us working in this space really across the country, thinking about the need for state of good repair for parkland and thinking of natural areas as another type of parkland, not as an asset that's separate or apart from other types of public infrastructure. Thinking about equity and expanding that thinking to include creating really high quality and meaningful recreation opportunities in natural areas, which in New York City and in many around tend to be located more on the sort of outer edges of cities away from the urban core and frequently are located in more under-resourced neighborhoods, and making sure that we think of these as a way to connect more people with high-quality park experiences. increasingly there's a real focus and interest in thinking about the role of urban forests in climate resilience and of nature and natural features more broadly as a form of climate resilience. And we are advocating and want to make sure that when we think about the climate benefits of the urban forest, we're not just thinking about street trees and not just thinking about wetlands and coastal protection, but are really thinking comprehensively about all of the nature within our cities and the full range of climate benefits that they provide. And then creating a sense of urgency, as Kristy mentioned, we're seeing a 50% increase in invasive cover between our canopy and understory. And we frequently use the analogy in our work that our forests are sort of one generation behind our transportation infrastructure, where deferred maintenance has created a real backlog of basic care, which has led to a need for a much larger investment than would have been needed if we had incrementally addressed issues as we identified them. So as Kristy gave us a really great overview of the sort of background on the framework and also how the agency is using it, but I wanted to describe some other components of how the framework is influencing the work that we're doing on the ground here in New York City today. Kristy mentioned the sort of key pieces, which include the addition of pre- and post-monitoring of restoration and management activities against this citywide baseline that we conducted, which allows us to really look at change in the entire forest system over time and also change of individual sites relative to that citywide condition. The ability to more proactively select where we work and to think about the kinds of interventions and the kinds of places that we want to expend our resources. And then having the ability to more accurately estimate the cost of future projects, which is great for fundraising and also great for having a more apples-to-apples conversation about natural areas management in terms that sort of related to other types of park infrastructure. So one of the things that the Natural Areas Conservancy is currently engaged in is expanding our partnership beyond our work directly with the Parks Department to work with the dozens of other nonprofit and friends groups that are also engaged in managing natural areas across the city. And we're doing that in a variety of ways, but the project I wanted to mention here is that we've been training nonprofits that have either dedicated staff or dedicated volunteer time to utilize the same data collection methods that we and the Parks Department are using, which is creating an increased level of transparency about site condition and prioritization and allowing us to both measure our collective impact in a new way, but also to allow organizations that have on-the-ground capacity to optimize that work without needing to become research experts and to help them by providing recommendations of where to work and how to evaluate the success of that work so that they're able to utilize the skills that they have on the ground to their maximum potential. We also, with support from the Wildlife Conservation Society, are now completing a project to develop an app-based tool to select which species to plant in restoration projects. We looked at information about both increased heat and also increased drought in New York City, and the tool that has been developed, which will be available publicly over the winter, allows, through a quick assessment, a practitioner to identify a target ecological community for restoration, and then within that community make suggestions about which individual species to plant. And we're very excited to have been using that over the last year for our internal projects, but now to be able to make it available to other practitioners in New York and throughout the Northeast. Our work on trails is one of the things that I'm personally most excited about. This is a before and after of a trail restoration project at a 130-acre section of Marine Park in South Brooklyn. The image on the top shows the trail system before work was conducted, and as you can see, it's a real kind of crazy squiggle of informal trails. There was no blazes on the ground and no trailhead signage, and while this area was being used by some local individuals, it was really hard as an outsider or even as a resident to feel safe and comfortable entering that area, not really knowing where you'd end up, and it was very hard to navigate and have a sort of direct path. Through a process that we've been engaged in with the Parks Department, we've identified more than 300 miles of trails in forested areas and are working to consolidate and reduce redundancy in those trail systems. And through that process, we do a series of micro restorations where we use infill planting and seeding to close off and increase the connection in these small areas that are being closed. It creates more core habitat, and then at the same time, it leaves a much more accessible trail system for recreation. And one of the things that's been particularly great about this program is that through a partnership with the Student Conservation Association, we've been able to recruit and hire local teenagers to do the on-the-ground trail improvements and restoration. So it really has these three benefits of being a job training program, an expansion of recreation opportunities, and a restoration of the forest resource. So I wanted to pivot and talk a little bit about a new initiative, which is an effort to better understand how practitioners across the entire United States are approaching the management of natural forested areas. And to give a little bit of background about why we decided to do this, we were very excited and heartened about the impact and sort of sweet spot that the Natural Areas Conservancy and the Parks Department have found in the creation of the Forest Management Plan for New York. But as we were working on that plan, we didn't see a ton of similar products in cities across the U.S. And as we think more and more about the importance of forests in cities really as a social resource, we were struck by this stat that came out earlier this year, which said that urban extreme heat is the #1 cause of death from climate in the United States, more than hurricanes, flooding, and storms combined. And really thinking about the condition of this huge forest resource, what we need to do to keep it as a key piece of a climate solution moving forward. Another piece that motivated us to think a little bit more broadly than New York is just the low visibility of natural forests, both locally and nationally. In New York City, we have a little under 700,000 street trees and more than 5 million trees in natural areas. About 500,000 of those natural area trees were planted through the Million Trees program and other planting initiatives. But as we think about really scaling urban forest management, I think we need to think about how we support natural regeneration in a more proactive way. So here's a map that gives you just really sort of a visual representation of the physical extent of the survey that we recently completed. We sent an in-depth survey out through the Trust for Public Land and through a series of professional networks to understand how practitioners are deciding where to work, the types of information that is being used to prioritize work on the ground, the kinds of management activities that are taking place, and the types of monitoring that is being done to evaluate the effectiveness of restoration and management activities. As we dug in to the survey prep, one of the things that the Trust for Public Land uncovered for us through some of their research is that there's 1.7 million acres of natural areas in city parkland, and that in the 100 largest U.S. cities in the United States, 84% of urban parkland is natural areas, which even for those of us who are working in this space is a really staggering number. And I think combined with the fact that 82% of North Americans live in urban areas, it's really an invitation for us to think about this resource on a whole different scale. So I'm going to give just 3 very sort of sneak preview looks at some of the survey questions and results. This slide shows a question about the decision-making process that practitioners are going through and the things that they are and maybe are not considering as key variables. So we've seen really uniformly that conservation of native species, plant biodiversity, and canopy closure are kind of across the board really common focuses. And it's worth noting, since this is a Forest Service webinar, that there's a lot of connection between the way that more rural forests are managed and the way that natural forests are managed, and a lot of opportunity to continue to think about data sharing. One of the things that was really surprising for us in looking at this result is that urban heat island and public accessibility ranked very low as high priority factors for decision makers, as did climate projections. So we see a lot of opportunity to strengthen the field of practice between natural resource management and some of these other really important social issues that cities are facing. Another question, and again, I just picked a couple to give kind of a representative feel of the kinds of things that we asked. We asked about social baseline information. There's a lot of information being collected about volunteerism and volunteer engagement, which is incredibly important, and there's a lot of information, which I'm sure Erika could elaborate on, about the sort of social cohesion that is created and maintained through volunteerism in public space. However, we saw information about demographics and human health and well-being ranking relatively low, and we see, again, real opportunities to sort of expand connections around other social factors beyond volunteer engagement in decision-making. And then this is the last of these sort of preview slides, thinking about the kinds of management activities that are taking place. And I'll point out on this slide the fact that there's a lot of opportunity to expand trail formalization and public access, and also that more traditional silvicultural practices, including thinning and activities that promote natural sort of regeneration, are things that cities are beginning to explore and that I think have some real potential as we think about how we can, with relatively low investment, expand the health and longevity of our forest systems. So a couple of takeaways from the survey. There's definitely a hunger for more tools and best practices by practitioners in cities. There is a real disconnect between resilience offices and mayor's offices and the people who are doing on-the-ground restoration opportunities, and I think some real sort of fodder for exploring this in more detail. And then the last piece is that people enjoy want to have more connection to nature, but that urban natural areas are an underutilized form of parkland, and that there's real opportunities through design and programming to expand the sense of safety and the physical opportunities that residents can enjoy in these places. These are just some opportunities that we see moving forward on a national scale for the restoration of forested natural areas. Again, touching on sort of expanded recreation, expanded connections to public health, increased funding both for restoration and for maintenance is a huge need that we've seen across the board, as well as a real hunger for more practical tools and resources that can be used in prioritization and evaluation of work. And I wanted to just give a little plug that if folks are interested in receiving the survey report when it is released this winter, I would encourage you to go to our website, naturalareasnyc.org, where you can sign up for our mailing list, and we'll be sending out an e-blast when the report is released, and look forward to engaging with folks in the years ahead. Thank you.